I view these people as traitors. They're all traitors. I believe I've said this publicly. The prime minister of Greece is a traitor, and he should be treated as such. The president of Cyprus is a traitor. Macron is a traitor. Mertz, Starmer, all of these people should be tried for high treason. Getting inside this conference was like a descent into hell. It's hard for me to find the correct words to describe the level of integration that is happening between Greece and Israel and dependency that's being created quite consciously by the Greek political elite, so that we will never be able to free ourselves, not in our lifetimes.
The Chinese are sending their brightest to the United States to get educated into neoliberalism, and then they go back to China and they try to implement all these horrible policies that just sell out their country to the United States. Now, luckily, China has been very good at defending against that stuff, but they're there. These people are there, and they are a force, these capitalists. They're trying to get that neoliberalization, to get that shift to the right. So once you have that problem, your country's sold out.
Why the hell would Greeks, looking historically and what the injustices that they have suffered, the colonialism, the imperialism, identify more with Northern Europeans than with our true brothers and sisters who are the peoples of the Eastern Mediterranean? It makes no sense to me. And you travel around this region, as I have. I've traveled extensively in all these countries in West Asia and Turkey. I see Greek, culture everywhere.
Okay, good day everyone. We are here again with another show. We are visited again with a veteran of the show and brother Dimitri Lascaris. He has been on our show, of course, many times. We have many guests on our show, but when Dimitri comes, I always genuinely look forward to that. It's really like talking to not only a buddy but a brother and a friend, and we can always really rant very well about the things that we find bothersome. But first, I wanted to talk to you about something that I saw you doing. We have we lately on this channel we are focusing a bit on Europe, different countries, and how they are dealing with the kind of world that we're in right now, especially vis-a-vis West Asia and Israel, of course. We had one show on the Netherlands recently. We just did a show on the UK with Professor David Miller. I don't know if you know David Miller, which was a very interesting show. I like it a lot, so I'm going to post that soon. And today I also wanted to talk a bit about Greece, and with who better, of course, than brother Dimitri, and especially because I saw you recently. How can I say that? Clandestine operations in conferences in Greece, which were really good, I must say. I can advise everybody to watch that stuff, because it's that kind of underground stuff that you hear about it, you think about it, but once you see it, you just see how disgusting it is, and how evil, and how these things go on the micro level. We often talk about, the influence of U.S. empire and Zionism on our societies, and we grand macro discussions. But once you see it on the micro level on the ground, it gets that extra factor of, I don't know, nefariousness, disgusting. I don't know what to say. But before I talk too long, Dimitri, can you tell us a bit what you did in Greece on those conferences, what you saw, and what it explains about what is going on, not only in Greece, but in most of European and Western societies?
Well, Greece has, amazingly, shockingly, a relationship with Israel today that the government regards as strategic, a deep and deepening partnership in every conceivable respect in international relations: economic, military, intelligence sharing, an energy relationship, tourism, and on and on. So, you could have gathered this that the Greek government attached a lot of importance to this relationship and didn't really give a damn about the genocide or any other crime being committed by Israel just by looking at the government's public statements. But getting inside this conference was like a descent into hell. Frankly, that's the way I would describe it. The conference was set up 3 years ago to promote deeper ties between Israel, Greece, and Cyprus, which have become a kind of axis of resistance to Turkey. But also, Greece and Cyprus have become key nodes for the transfer of military personnel and military equipment from the United States and or Northern Europe to Israel and to U.S. military bases in West Asia as they've been conducting this war on Iran. So it's not just that, from the Greek perspective primarily, and Cypriot perspective, they see Israel as a protection against Turkish aggression. But from the American perspective and the Israeli perspective, I think it's primarily about Greece and Israel providing to Israel a strategic rear, where they can husband military material, military personnel away from the battlefield. In any case, this thing was set up. This conference is called Mari Med. 3 years ago, it's an annual conference. It's by invitation only. You can attempt to get into it as a member of the media, which I did last year. I tried to register, and I never got a response. Now, I found out about it relatively late, so that might have been the reason why I never got a response. But I've tried many times to go to conferences like this as a member of the media, and I'm always rejected. So I figured they just weren't going to let me in because they knew the kind of journalism I was doing. This time, however, for some bizarre reason, about 3 weeks before the conference, I received by email an invitation from some Israeli company called Benny Moran Productions that I'd never heard of before. I still don't really know what they do. I can figure it out because there's very little information about it. So I almost thought, brother, that it was kind of like a trick because I'd never heard of them before. I thought maybe they're going to arrest me when I show up at this conference. But in any case, I jumped at the opportunity. Had to pay 167 euros to go. I didn't go as a member of the media. If I tried to go as a member of the media, they would have asked me about what media organization I'm from and so forth, and probably they would have found out about my reporting and my attitude towards Israel. So I just accepted this invitation. I paid the ticket. And when I showed up at this hotel in downtown Athens, which is owned by an Israeli, it's called the Brown Acropole Hotel. It's frankly not a nice hotel. It's kind of a bit of a dump, which is funny because the Israeli government, the Greek government talked about this hotel at the conference as though it was somehow making Athens a more attractive place, but it's just a dumpy hotel. So I go in there and I get in without any problem, and I videotaped in their entirety every single speech during the first day of the conference. The second day of the conference was just private meetings where people were prepared to say things that were more sensitive that they weren't necessarily prepared to say in their speeches. And I didn't attend those private meetings because I thought they're definitely going to find, if I try to go into those private meetings, I'm toast. They're going to seize my devices, my videos, who knows what else they'll do. So I just attended the speeches. And I'll just highlight for you who was there, some of the bigger names. The Deputy Foreign Minister of Israel, Sharon Haskell, who, by the way, likes to stoke Islamophobia in Western European countries, particularly Britain. The Israeli ambassador to Greece, a character by the name of Noam Katz, the chairman of Israel Ports Authority, the chairman of Israel Shipyards was there. Some very high-powered consultants were there. An officer, a senior executive of Israel Aerospace Industries was there. On the Greek side, the Minister of Tourism was there, who's a very important person because Greece's economy, 34% of it is tourism. And so too was the Deputy Foreign Minister of Greece, and a character who has been appointed Greece's ambassador to IMEC, the India, Middle East, Europe corridor, which is this, it's kind of like Washington's alternative to the Belt and Road Initiative. Okay. So these are the people there were many other people who were there, but they were the heavy hitters. And what I saw, uh, it's horrifying. It's horrifying. It's not just that the Israeli and Greek politicians, and also there were some Cypriot politicians there, were having a love fest. We're literally, tongue bathing each other. And there wasn't a word of criticism about Israel's crimes. There wasn't a not a single mention during the entire affair of Palestinians. Not a single word. They talked about what is happening in the Strait of Hormuz. The most ridiculous thing, they were saying that this proves that the IMEC, the India, Middle East, Europe corridor, is extremely important. And by the way, that corridor would effectively result in the normalization of relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel, because it would create a trade corridor going from the Strait of Hormuz through Saudi Arabia into Jordan and then into Haifa. And this would, the economic relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel would become very, very important and integrated if they did this thing. In any case, they talked about the situation in the Strait of Hormuz as being proof that the IMEC is necessary, when in fact, if you look at the maps of the IMEC, the seizure of the Strait of Hormuz by Iran makes the IMEC completely impracticable. They can't implement it. So the level of dishonesty, the intellectual dishonesty, was shocking. But the part about it that really troubled me the most was I found out that, I didn't know this, that they're creating this thing called the Great Undersea Interconnector, which is basically going to be electricity cables running from Israel in the Eastern Mediterranean to Greece. And it will create energy dependency, Greece's energy dependency on Israel. So Greece is going to be, once you put in that multi-billion-dollar infrastructure in place, Greece becomes in many ways an economic hostage, an energy hostage to Israel, and it will become very difficult for any government to unwind that relationship. And so I was absolutely alarmed by this, and I tried to convey in my reporting that Greece is becoming. It's hard for me to find the correct words to describe the level of integration that is happening between Greece and Israel, and dependency that's being created quite consciously by the Greek political elite, so that we will never be able to free ourselves, not in our lifetimes, of this relationship with this genocidal entity.
Yeah, so I would actually say Greece is becoming a neo-colony. So not a colony like the Palestinians, of course, but a neo-colony where you have a political class, kind of capitalism political class that is doing the bidding for Israel. Can we see it that way?
Yes, absolutely. And Cyprus is in even worse condition in that regard. Cyprus is effectively a Zionist colony now.
And what? So my question is, what's going on? Like, why Greece? I hear that Greece is really being overflooded with Israelis. Of course, it's relatively close. I get that part, but isn't there a lot of resistance? How is that both politically and socially? I'm very curious about that. What are the Greek people thinking? That's number one. Of course, that is very diverse. But what is your sense of that? And number two, is there any political resistance? Because I'm so baffled by the fact that there's such a lack of political resistance in the West. I have no idea what's going on here.
Well, we have to distinguish between the political elite and the oligarchy on the one hand, and ordinary Greeks on the other. There was a poll done by the Democracy Perception Index a couple of months ago, and one of the questions they polled people in 98 countries. Greece was one of them, and one of the questions they asked was, whose side are you on in the conflict between Iran and Israel and the United States? And Greece was, I think, one of maybe two countries in Europe where the population was more on the side of Iran than they are on the side of Israel and the United States. The Minister of Tourism at this conference gave this absurd speech where she was saying how we're one big happy family, and every time Israelis get off cruise ships, we all clasp our hands together and we sing Kumbaya. and oh, we're so happy to have Israelis coming to our country. But you can find, one video after another on social media of small merchants like restaurant owners throwing Israelis out of their restaurants and saying, "We don't want baby murderers here. We don't want any child killers. Get out." There have been instances where protesters prevented cruise ships from Israel from docking, and the Greek government, it got so bad that they had to bring out the riot police to keep the protesters separated from these Israeli tourists. So at the level of the people, there is disgust, I think, amongst the majority of the population, a substantial majority of the population. But the political elite, right across, I think, with the possible exception of the communists, who have the third largest party, or the third or fourth largest party in Greek's parliament, they have a significant presence in the Greek parliament. I think pretty much there's unanimity, including the so-called, moderate left in Greek politics on this question. Why is this the case? It's partly because we've had very, contentious relations with Turkey over the years, and Turkey is perceived to be an adversary of Israel, and Israel is perceived to be a regional military power. Even more, there's a lot of overestimation of Israel's military capabilities in the West, as I'm sure you know, brother. But in any case, there are people in Greece, particularly who lean to the right, who think that having this close relationship with Israel provides us a measure of protection from Turkish aggression. They genuinely believe that. Now, I think this is absolutely idiotic because for two reasons. First of all, the relationship is probably increasing tensions between Greece and Turkey. It's not lowering tensions, it's increasing tensions. And secondly, if we ever got into any kind of a military conflict with Turkey, they would use us, the Israelis would use us as a proxy to weaken Turkey at our own expense. The battlefield would be Greece or Cyprus. It's not going to be Israel. They would throw us under the bus. They, just as the West is using Ukrainians to weaken Russia, Israel and the United States would use Greece and Cyprus to weaken Turkey if it ever got to outright. So I think they're wrong, but there's, I'd say that maybe 30% of the population, it's my best sense, they support this relationship primarily for that reason. But also, the oligarchy has important, they derive important business with Israel. The shipping industry has important business with Israel. The cement industry has important business with Israel. So they do this for purely crass reasons. And then there's a bigger problem. I think this is the final, maybe even the most important cause of this this grotesque relationship that we have with Israel, is that the whole of the European political elite has basically been hijacked by Washington. Somehow, my view of what's going on in Europe, brother, I'd be very interested to hear your point of view on this. I think that effectively Washington over the course of the last 20, 30 years has effected a quiet continent-wide coup in Europe and has replaced politicians who actually did care about the sovereignty of Europe and the long-term interests of Europe and the quality of life of ordinary Europeans. I mean, I'm not suggesting that Europe was ever a paradise. It never was. It never was. But you had people like Chirac, like Mitterrand, for example, in France, like Helmut Kohl, even Merkel to a degree, who did actually care about sovereignty, the sovereignty of their countries. And they very quietly have been replaced by these people who overwhelmingly, by the way, come out of the financial industry, who were educated in the United States or Britain, who worked in the financial industry, who are very Americanized, who are probably extremely corrupt. And they've risen to positions of power right across the continent. And as a result, the continent has just become nothing but a vassal of Washington. It's a complete vassal of Washington. And you're seeing this, with relations between Europe and Russia. We've severed our energy ties to Russia to a large degree, even though that was profoundly contrary to the interests of Europeans. Why? Because that's what Washington wanted us to do. The Biden administration blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. I think that the evidence suggests strongly that that's exactly what happened. And what has Europe done about it? They buried the whole act of war under the carpet. They don't even want to have a discussion about what actually happened. This is how subservient the European political elite now is to Washington. So I view these people as traitors. They're all traitors. I believe I've said this publicly. The Prime Minister of Greece is a traitor, and he should be treated as such. The president of Cyprus is a traitor. Macron is a traitor. Mertz, Starmer, all of these people should be tried for high treason.
Yeah, brother, absolutely. And if you ask me what's going on, it's a very difficult question. I talked to a Dutch historian, and she is of the opinion that there is, of course, it started with Europe being colonizers. Then the Europeans went to the Americas. So she finds it problematic when we say, "Oh, Europe is colonized by the Americans." She sees it as an extension just of a continuation of European colonialism, where also the former European colonial powers, such as the Netherlands, Britain, etc., still have deep-rooted interests that they had before the United States became the hegemon. And they now, through the United States, they can continue also these interests. But I do agree with you, of course, that the United States is so powerful that there is also no way for the Europeans to go their own independent path. So we in that sense, the Europeans are neo-colonized. And then you have, of course, the exceptional, how can you say that? Complex, sophisticated, intricate way of the United States to colonize the world, including, of course, Europe. That is, don't forget that most Europeans, most Westerners who go to the higher places in politics, etc., are the ones who go to the top universities, the Ivy League schools, etc. So they are all educated in Cambridge, Harvard, Princeton, Chicago, and then they spread out over the West and they become the political class, and they implement U.S. capitalism, they implement U.S. policies, and that is why I always keep really repeating that here in China when I'm teaching, but also when I'm on conferences or writing papers, that the Asians in general, not just the Chinese, the Asians in general really need to get rid of their addiction to Ivy League schools. Because the universities over here, first of all, the universities over here are all many of them are ranking in the global top 100, even global top 50 alongside these schools. So it's not that they are worse schools. It's more of a prestige symbol still. And it's a very dangerous thing, because also when we had Professor Michael Hudson on our show, he said the same thing. He said the Chinese are sending their brightest to the United States to get educated into neoliberalism, and then they go back to China and they try to implement all these horrible policies that just sell out their country to the United States. Now, luckily, China has been very good at defending against that stuff, but they're there. These people are there, and they are a force, these capitalists. They're trying to get that neoliberalization, to get that shift to the right. So once you have that problem, your country's sold out. That's it. You're done, because it's this kind of tentacles through intellectualism, tentacles through corporations, and I think that is what you see in Europe right now. It's already, that's so deep intertwined. There is just almost no way to get out. Even if you think, why are our politicians not resisting? Why are they not going against the grain and saying we're not going to do that? I think there is just structurally, it's impossible. You're done if you do that. You cannot even stay in the political scene if you want to do that. I mean, you see it now in the UK also. You see now with the Greens, they do the same thing as what happened with Corbyn back in the day. They also start to do the whole mea culpa thing. Can you believe it?
Yeah.
And there seems to be just so much structural, systemic pressure on politicians that an independent way through the system is just pretty much impossible, I think.
Yeah, those elite, I hesitate to call them educational institutions in the United States, Britain, and France. They are grooming people from the Western world, lesser countries, less powerful, influential countries in the Western world and in the non-Western world to become effectively servants of Washington. They groom them ideologically. I think many of these people, I'm guessing here, I don't have proof, but when they go to the United States and they're being educated, I think that the intelligence communities in these countries establish relationships with them, uh, maybe even recruit them, maybe turn some of them into outright agents of these intelligence agencies, send them back to their home countries, and then they proceed to engage in what I regard as high treason. I think that that's what's going on. I think this is a disease that we need to cure in countries like Greece and in countries in the non-Western world. This idea that sending, our brightest young people to these elite institutions in these imperial countries is somehow good for our people, good for our economy, good for the future. No, it's a disaster. It's an unmitigated disaster. I mean, they should actually give serious consideration to barring this and saying, you want to go and get your education over there, uh, we're taking away your citizenship. You go become a citizen of that country. We don't want you, because this is what's being done to these people. They're being poisoned and groomed and prepared to become, serve the interests of the imperial masters in Washington.
Yeah, absolutely. And you say something very interesting about the whole Turkey Greece thing, which is of course problematic, because that can be used by, of course, U.S. Empire and Israel. I currently have a paper under review for a very prominent journal in academia, so I hope it gets through. I'm through the first rounds of review, so that's a good sign. But it is about the psychology of dividing people into different identities, of course. Think about white, not white, etc., etc. And I talk about how that is extremely problematic at the border, you could say, of certain kind of classifications. How can I say that? At the border of certain identities. So what I'm trying to say is, what is the border of the European identity? You get to approximately Turkey, Greece, Turkey. Mm-hmm. And the funny thing is, I always ask my students in class, I said, if you would classify somebody from the Netherlands, would you classify that person as white or not white? Yeah, white. Okay. If you classify somebody from Finland, yeah, white. Okay. What about Greece? Yeah, white. What about Turkey? Oh, and then it's silent, and then it's suddenly, no, not white. So I say to them, okay, so people from Greece have more in common with the Dutch, the Norwegians, and the Finnish people than their neighbor, the Turks. So according to the Western racial classification, Greek people have more in common with Norwegians than their neighbors, the Turks. And they're like, yeah, makes no sense. Yeah. I said, okay, so how does that cutoff point work, that racial cutoff point? And then you can just completely deconstruct the whole idea of race. And then people realize, oh yeah, why is that actually? Oh, and then it's the religion factor, of course. Okay, it's a majority Muslim country, so people will say, then you're suddenly classified as not white. It makes no sense. Well, why am I saying this? I'm saying this because I read a couple of very interesting papers from a Greek psychologist for that paper, and that Greek psychologist did something very, very interesting. She showed that in many studies in psychology, Greece is always lumped together as part of the West, Greek history and that philosophy and all that kind of stuff. But then she showed empirically that Greece has more in common with Mediterranean cultures such as Turkey, but also Arabic cultures in many ways, on many psychological phenomena. Okay. So in other words, you have that kind of, what you're seeing is that kind of colonization of the Greek identity into the European colonial construct even though when she makes the case, when you check historically, Greece was not this kind of society like many of the Protestant Northern European societies that went around the world to colonize the world. Now, why am I saying this? I'm actually I'm actually starting to ask myself, why was I saying this? But I'm saying this because Greece right now is exploited, you could say, into that kind of Western imperial identity again.
Yeah.
And it's, they use that kind of antagonism of between Turkey and Greece, because it benefits also Israel. Even though I personally think it would be so much better if a country like Turkey and Greece would find common ground and defend themselves against Western Empire. You know what I mean? I'm sorry, I'm going a bit off track here, but yeah.
No, I completely agree with you. The only thing you said I don't necessarily agree with is I don't think that today Greece is the at the outer edge of Europe. I think it's Israel. Israel is essentially a European colony built on the bodies, the land, the resources of the Palestinian people. It's a European colony. I mean, it's the most spending time in Greece. I didn't know this. There are Israeli basketball teams play in European leagues. It's not that they are, participating in a European championship. They actually play in European leagues. There's the Eurovision contest. There's football. The participation of the football clubs. There's this relationship that we're building with Israel through this undersea cable and so forth. It's basically a European military garrison in the heart of the world's most oil-rich region, and so that's where the real outer edge is of this declining civilization. But when it come back to your point, even though most Greeks, I strongly believe, based on polling evidence and my interactions with Greeks, are sympathetic to the Palestinians much more so than the Israelis. They do, most of them, regard themselves as European, and they feel very strongly about this. And so, even though it gets me into trouble, Karim, I go out of my way when I sit down and have conversations with people about Greece's place in the world. I've said this over and over again, knowing full well that some of them are going to have like a reaction and go, "Oh, what are you talking about?" I say to them, we have much more in common with Arabs and Turks than we do with Finns or Germans. I mean, the Germans occupied our damn country in one of the most brutal Nazi occupations, and the British and the Americans, they were the ones who overthrew Greek democracy in the 1960s and installed a Nazi collaborator and a CIA agent as dictator of Greece. That stuff was done to us by Northern Europeans. I could go on and on, the crimes that they've committed, the austerity that Greece has experienced during the past, the crushing austerity was imposed upon Greece by Brussels and Berlin and Washington. So why the hell would Greeks, looking historically and what the injustices that they have suffered, the colonialism, the imperialism, identify more with Northern Europeans than with our true brothers and sisters who are the peoples of the Eastern Mediterranean? Makes no sense to me. And you travel around this region, as I have. I've traveled extensively in all these countries in West Asia and Turkey. I see Greek, culture everywhere. Elements of it. I call it Greek culture, but a shared culture in the food, in the music, in the habits of people, their lifestyle. We have much more in common with the peoples of West Asia and Turkey than we do with Northern Europeans. But getting Greeks to understand that is not an easy thing. They've been brainwashed into thinking that we are we are the basis upon which European democracy was, ancient Athens and all this crap, which wasn't by the way, it wasn't really a democracy. Women were disenfranchised. There was slavery in ancient Athens. It was, yeah. This is all just mythology at the end of the day. But the fact is, we are much closer in so many respects to the peoples of this region than we are to Northern Europeans, and I wish most Greeks would see that. We'd be on the path to recovering our sovereignty if people understood that.
Yeah, absolutely, Dimitri. And I would say that is actually that's that power of colonial mentality, I always say, and white supremacy. Yeah, it's like it's infecting all these people, and they want to be part of that. I mean, even see it among the Russians. They want to be part. Many of them want to be part of white empire. You know, many of those politicians, for example. I would include Putin in there, and. Uh, and it's the same with it has been such a successful way of making people feel inferior if they don't belong to that identity. So that is why so many people are whitening themselves up. I mean, look at these Iranians who look at these Iranians who hate who hate their own country, and then they're blonding their hair, and, and they want to look white. You know, and I'm like, I should not laugh because it's a very sad thing. Don't get me wrong. It's psychologically a very sad thing, but it's a deep internalized form of inferiority. And don't forget, you had it everywhere, Dimitri. You had it among the Turks too. You had among the many of those the secular Turks who wanted to be part of the back in the day of the European continent, and they wanted to distance themselves from the Middle Eastern cultures. And again, that is purely psychological. That's a colonial mentality. That's that very successful way in which the West, for centuries, has made people believe that if you do not belong to that imperial, dominant, white, colonial identity, which was just invented by a bunch of capitalists, then you are inferior. And a lot of people who do not read history, who do not focus on these things more deeply, they never understand, how their brain is being manipulated.
Yeah.
And in your case, sorry, one more little things. In your case, Dimitri, you travel around West Asia. You traveled there. You see how beautiful those cultures and rich these cultures are and these people. So for you, that has evaporated. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, and the thing I love the most about this region is the courage, the resistance to injustice. Europe is a joke when it comes to resistance. It's an absolute pathetic joke. Europe has completely capitulated in every conceivable respect to the white supremacists and the oligarchs and the masters in Washington. Whereas, right across West Asia, we are seeing the most extraordinary acts of courage and sacrifice every single day by people who have been brutalized their entire lives and oppressed their entire lives. I gave a speech recently at an event in Toronto, an anti-capitalism event, in which I said that the reason why I keep going back to West Asia, the primary reason is because that's where I feel the greatest hope and the greatest inspiration. When I'm in Europe, you begin to become dejected because of the resignation and the complacency and the apathy. I mean, right now, to see that we are being plunged into an economic crisis in Europe, not just because of the severing of the energy relationship with Russia, but now because of this insane war on Iran, and we're about to be plunged into a full blown economic crisis, and I don't see a damn protest. People won't even go into the streets and protest against this war, Karim. Forget about actually laying down their lives or giving up their homes to destruction at the hands of an enemy occupier, which is what people are doing in the resistance in West Asia every single day. They won't even go out in the streets and protest against this criminal war, which is going to destroy the economy of Europe, probably within the next couple of months, what remains of it, right? So it's just absolutely pathetic how apathetic and complacent and brainwashed Europeans have become, and Canadians too. When I came out of this conference, in this pro-Israel conference in Athens, I got in a taxi to go back to my hotel room, and struck up a conversation with a taxi driver. He struck up a conversation with me. He's a very talkative guy, and he ended up finding out that I was born and raised in Canada, but that I'm Greek. And he said to me, "So how do you feel about being Canadian, being Greek?" I said, "Well, my parents told me when I was a young boy, never forget, Dimitri, that you're a Greek first and a Canadian second." And I've never forgotten. I'm a Greek. I'm indigenous to this land. I have a powerful bond to this land and the history and the culture, and that it supersedes everything in terms of my national identity. And he said, you know, I just had a guy in my car today. He was actually born in Greece, but he left when he was a boy. His family left, and he was raised in Canada. And I asked him the same question, and he said, I'm Canadian. And he just blew up. He just went off, you know. And so you know, there are people when it's amazing how this delusion about Western supremacy infects people, you know, who live in the West who don't even come from the West. Even you find people from, you know, black and brown people from the non-Western world coming and being raised in Canada, the United States, and they succumb to this notion that Western values and civilization is superior to anything that's ever existed, and the rest of the world just doesn't matter. It should just take lessons from the West. No, we actually are probably at this stage the lowest form of civilization existing on the planet today.
Yeah, amen, brother, amen. And I totally, I totally resonate with what you're saying. I mean, I always tell, full of pride over here, that I got a very big grant from the government over here in Hong Kong, China, to study something called, indeed, colonial mentality psychologically. So I studied that in Singapore, Malaysia, and here in Hong Kong, purely because of that psychological internalization of inferiority, racially, culturally, intellectually. And it's I became so fascinated by that, by living abroad, you know, living in Malaysia, living in China, etc., where I just saw how deep rooted that is on a very subliminal basis. Like, a lot of people don't even realize it. Like, to give you a small example, I love to let my undergraduate students do a presentation of a movie that of their choice, and then discuss how that movie relates to cultural differences. Okay? And you will not believe how many Chinese students, in particular Hong Kong Chinese students, every year come with a movie where it's about the cultural difference between the West and the East, and then it's always a movie about how a Chinese girl or something meets a Western man, and then that Western family is super open-minded and liberal, but the Chinese girl has a traditional family, and they don't accept this kind of stuff, and they don't accept. And I tell these students, I said, don't you see what's going on here? You know, I want you guys to go to a meta level. Not just like, oh, we are more traditional, they are more liberal. No. Go to a meta level. What's going on? What is the producer of this movie trying to convey? Because is this actually true? Because I can tell you this. My Algerian grandparents were way more open-minded to my mother when she came there as a young woman with my dad, and they told her, "Oh, girls, smoke, take a cigarette," because my mother was like, "Oh, I cannot smoke. I need to be polite." And fume, ma fille, fume. They said, you know, smoke. But my Dutch grandparents, they didn't want even to see the parents of my father, because they were like, we don't want those foreigners here. And they were very unhappy with my mother dating a foreigner back in the day. But I must say, and this I always tell that, my mom said, okay, if you don't want to see them or him, you won't see me anymore. So eventually they caved. And my mother said, I came there with your father's parents. They couldn't speak. You know, her parents and my father's parents, because different languages. She said, but I could just leave. The whole day they were just with hands and feet talking to each other, and they loved each other, absolutely loved each other. And not only that, my dad really became the, how do you say that in English, the almost the favorite, how do you say that, son-in-law. He was. They really found each other. They had a lot of similarities, and so eventually they melted, of course. But what I'm trying to say is that these movies try to portray this kind of liberal Western worldview of open-mindedness, rainbow colors, and I always tell them, I said, no, that's absolutely not true. Maybe what you're seeing is portraying some elite New York suburb, what you see in these movies, but most people in the United States are not living this kind of life or are that open-minded to differences. You know what I mean? And these are all these insidious, just like what we talked about with Ivy League schools. These are these insidious forms of colonization, mental colonization, that eventually shape a sense of inferiority among people. You know what I mean?
100%. Just one footnote I want to add, because you may know that my wife is of Algerian origin, and her parents were born and raised in Algeria, and they're practicing Muslims. And in 30 years, they know I'm an atheist. They've known from the very beginning that I'm an atheist. And in 30 years, I can say, in all honesty, I have never had a moment of tension between me and my mother and father-in-law. It has never been anything other than respectful, affectionate interaction. And I mean, I don't know anybody who's not had, the occasional problem with their mother and father-in-law over the course of a 30-year marriage. I can say that even though there's this vast divide between us in terms of our religious orientation, our cultural background, so forth. And the whole family, my wife has a very large family. They've all embraced me as one of their own. I can't say the same about, my family. My mother and father, yes, they were always very kind and loving to my wife. But I have uncles and aunts, and cousins, some of them who were kind of troubled about the fact that I married an Arabic woman who came from a Muslim family. And they didn't necessarily come out and say it, but you could tell. You could tell they were not comfortable with it.
That's so cool, man, that you have that connection to Algeria too. That's I really like that. Yeah, well, what can I say, Dimitri? It's a deep-rooted form of internalized colonialism that not only happens to people outside of the West, but also inside the West, of course. And it's a constant bombardment, I always say, of inferiority slash superiority, whether it's the news, whether it's education, whether it's Hollywood, Netflix, video games. It's everywhere and continuously. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah. So yeah. Go ahead. You want to say something?
I was just thinking today about how the West has the most sophisticated propaganda system that humanity has ever seen. And whether you're talking about the propagandas in sports, advertising, Hollywood movies, television series, think tanks. It's pervasive. It's ubiquitous. It's relentless. It never stops, and it's extremely sophisticated. And it has inevitably resulted, in my opinion, in people living in the West being the most brainwashed people in the world. I mean, they really, and this whole ethic of Western supremacy, we're better than everybody else. We have nothing to learn from them. They have to learn from us. It means that people, they don't make inquiries about, they make no real genuine effort to understand how other people outside of the West think and believe and what contributions they can make, what we can learn from them, because they believe they're superior. So, it's incredibly stifling, I find, coming back from the non-Western world. And this was especially true when I was living in New York City, Karim. Like if I left New York City and came, for example, to Europe, I felt like I was, I'd been let out of intellectual jail because inside the United States, the epicenter of this Western propaganda system, the power of that propaganda is overwhelming, man. It's like suffocating, but even in Europe and Canada, we have no idea. The vast majority of people living in the West have no idea what is actually happening in the non-Western world. They really don't.
Yeah, it reminds me of what one of my guests said from the Netherlands, Danny Samar. He's of Indonesian Dutch descent. So Indonesia was, of course, formerly colonized by the Netherlands. Indonesians have psychologically struggled a lot with imposed inferiority in Dutch history. Really, really bad stuff happened to the Indonesians. Also put in camps and retrained and all that kind of stuff. Well, and you still see that today. You see lots of our top politicians are of semi-Indonesian descent, and they have very racist, very Islamophobic, very internal. I always say it's an internalized colonialism. It's an internalized form of inferiority, which is often more extreme among those who want to prove that they are not part of that marginalized identity. So you have these mixed Indonesians, and they become extremely racist. You know what I mean? And it reminds me of what he said. He said, living in the Netherlands, watching television, listening to the news, walking on the street, sitting on terraces. He said it's like swimming in a bowl of toxic racism. That's what he says. I find it such a interesting and good way of saying it. Swimming in a bowl of toxic racism. It is everywhere, but at the same time it's invisible because it's so normalized. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Static crackles, voices rise. Truth breaks through their velvet lies. A screen of fire, a shield of steel. Bedbeat medium makes you feel. No borders, no change. No silence,